Thanks again for staying with us on this last lap of our conversation on Nigerian Decides on Independent Television. Beautiful Monday morning. Joining us, we have a former Senior Special Assistant to the State Government on Legal Matters, a notary public, constitutional lawyer, Sir Adam Saliu. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you, moderator. Good day, viewers.
We also have with us Barrister Matthew Adagasa, is a public affairs commentator, a constitutional lawyer, civil rights activist. Thank you for joining us, Barrister Matthew.
Thanks for having me, Duke.
Just now, focus is on the Supreme Court judgment on the Naira redesign policy. Nigerians can continue to use the old Naira notes 1,500, 200 till 31st of December this year. But the banks are not complying with this. The banks are saying they need to get a directive from the Central Bank of Nigeria before they comply. What is the meaning of this against the background that the Supreme Court is supposed to be the final arbiter on any matter within the Federation? Barrister Adam, so let me quickly start with you on that.
Well, this issue dovetails on the separation of powers. Montesquieu, a French political philosopher, in his book, L'Esprit de Loi, he divided governments and governance into three: executive, legislative, and judiciary. Supposedly, the three arms of government were independent of one another. But he equally added a rider that there is primus inter pares, that there is first amongst equals. And that first is the executive. So that is where we are today. A part of the legislature, the judiciary, has issued a proclamation putting the acceptability of the former old notes to December 31. But those who are in charge of executives have not complied. As at this morning, the banks have not received directive to execute that order. It is equally a situation of de jure and de facto situation. De jure, according to law, that's what it makes us say. But de facto, according to facts, the executive is the primus inter pares. He brings out the money to look after the legislature, executive, the judiciary, etc., including the Supreme Court. However, there's a provision. The central bank, acting as a power and on powers of executive, have put a meeting for 20th and 21st of March, about 2 weeks' time, that they will meet to review the Supreme Court directive and issue a communique. So let us wait and see.
So it's a wait and see game.
Yes,
All right, Barrister Adagasa, isn't this an aberration of some sort that a judgment has been given by the final arbiter in the land, talking about the Supreme Court, on the matter that was brought before it, and the central bank is waiting for another 2 weeks? I thought once this judgment is given, there's supposed to be an immediate compliance against the background of how this policy has affected Nigerians.
The unfortunate situation was highly avoidable, but I wonder why Supreme Court allowed itself to be hoodwinked into this messy situation, whereby they are now able to pass a judgment that is almost inenforceable. There's what we call empty judgment in law, brutal form, empty judgment. You sue somebody who is a pauper for 5 billion naira, and you got the judgment. How do you execute a 5 billion naira judgment?
So is this one of such?
Is
this one of such empty judgment?
It is an empty judgment in the sense that from the very start, Supreme Court to have known that central bank acts confer autonomy on the CBN, and the court cannot decree or proclaim a piece of legislation to now repeal an existing constitutional provision. That was what the Supreme Court intended to do by dabbling into areas where it has no constitutional power to go into. So when you enter the arena, as they say, you should be prepared to take the punches. I think the Supreme Court is being bashed now in terms of integrity and reputation, whereby the man who knows that is conferred with the powers constitutionally to do what he's doing, and there's an interference from some busybody governor somewhere running to the Supreme Court to compel him to breach the Constitution. There is now a matter between the devil and the WC. How do you obey Supreme Court order and disobey the Constitution? Which one is superior? The Constitution created the Supreme Court and gave it powers and functions and limit the scope of authorities. There is a red line. The executive is a constitutional creation, so is the legislation. And the CBN itself is a creation of the Constitution. All over the world, they enjoy a reasonable level of autonomy. That is to make sure the monetary system of any nation is not subject to vagaries and the whims and caprices of political actors or individuals, powerful individuals. If you allow government to keep running to the Supreme Court to interfere with the smooth operation of the Central Bank of Nigeria and now want to erode their autonomy, we run into a situation whereby one day when the Supreme Court fixes its monetary liquidity ratio or the lending ratio, interest rate, a businessman who feel it doesn't agree with his business plan, we run to the Supreme Court and say, oh, the percentage should not be, it should be 0% for loan. And the Supreme Court, by this their pronouncement, they are now bound to follow their precedent because they have begun to accept matters which ordinarily does not confer them jurisdiction. So CBN, don't forget, was not joining that suit. And now you are passing a judgment to bind a party that is not in the suit before you.
Okay.
That itself is unknown to law. There's a parable it's an adage in my native land that the soup you did not eat cannot be found staining your lips. Those who went to the arena, they should be the one. They are the parties to this fight.
Are you not justifying this policy by CBN against the background that if it's actually a well thought through policy, the backlash of the policy in terms of its impact on the economic status of Nigerians would have been on the positive side? And against that background, the judgment from the Supreme Court, one of the justices in the Supreme Court said he's never seen anything like this, where someone gives his money to the bank, and now he wants the money back, he can't get it back, or she can't get it back, as the case may be. He considered that as an indictment on the fundamental human right of such an individual. Let me get your take along this line. I mean, Nigerians, their fundamental human rights has been impeded upon by this policy of the Supreme Court. So where do you go to? Do you take the laws into your hand? Where do you go to the court to seek redress?
Let me come to that quickly.
Yes.
The Supreme Court indicted itself by that line of reasoning, that pronouncement. It has effectively taken over the powers and functions of the first court of instance. How will the Supreme Court just assume original jurisdiction over a matter of bank transaction between customer and bank? That line of thoughts by the Supreme Court shows that they were dabbling into a political arena, and they should be ready to deliver a politicized judgment.
But if I may interject.
Let me finish.
Yes.
There is no way Supreme Court will be talking about the right, fundamental human rights of the customer right to access his deposit, when they are talking about a conflict between the ordinarily the government and the federating units. Yeah. Federating units and government, they are not customer to that bank. The policy is not it's a policy that affects the banking public. Now, if the customer of a bank has an issue with the bank, where do they go to? Not Supreme Court. They go to the High Court. So why will Supreme Court now allow matter to come into their hollow chambers through the roof or through the window? Or procedural?
Okay, Barrister, let me ask this question. I'll be asking our learned a highly learned guest. Now, he has said that the Supreme Court ought not to interfere in these Naira notes, new Naira note policy, and all of that. Now, the governors were forced to approach the Supreme Court because of necessity. The residents of their state, the citizens, were in despair. We were faced with challenges. And the fact that the new currency introduced by the CBN was approved by the federal government, which is the executive arm. And so, if the Supreme Court is the final arbiter, the Supreme Court is supposed to help the states. They thought they could seek redress from the Supreme Court. So, Barrister Liu, do you think it was misplaced for these governors to have run to the Supreme Court when the people were in hardship?
The governors put the cart before the horse. Ordinarily, to seek redress, there is civil and judicial procedure. Cases emanate from the lower courts, High Court, Court of Appeal, etc. It does not start exactly from the Supreme Court. So it has no locus, no jurisdiction to entertain it at the first instance. Two, the Supreme Court haven't pronounced judgment. The effectiveness of judgment is the execution. Does it have what it takes to enforce it? A week has passed now. It has not been obeyed. The nearest to it is that central bank, backed by its own acts, backed by extension by the executive, that the president of the country, who even has immunity, has put 2 weeks to look at it before declaring compliance. So the Supreme Court made itself a laughing stock by becoming an interloper in a matter that ought to start from the lower court. They cannot enforce it. As at this morning, the banks, they have not been given the rejected 1,000 Naira, 500 Naira notes. They are still, that they have been bonded by central bank, or they are not available. Nemo dash, what none are best. Or the ordinary banks cannot give what they don't have. And the Supreme Court that was sitting in a cushioned atmosphere gave a judgment which they cannot offend, exercise. They don't even have the paraphernalia to execute it. As I said, the executive is primus inter pares among the separation of power, and the central bank is an offshoot of the executive.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. The major crux of the matter is the rights of Nigerians that seems to have been trampled upon by the Central Bank of Nigeria by virtue of this policy that was initiated. We have seen now that whatever is the reason for this policy, it was politically motivated. And so, under that circumstance, what options was there actually for the people in addressing this issue, in your opinion?
If there are politically motivated decisions by any agency of government or arm of government, does it now justify the involvement of the Supreme Court in politics?
At the first instance.
If you say it was politically motivated, one can also argue the Supreme Court action is also politically induced. They have gone political. Because as you speak, you were talking about enforcement of that judgment. And I say it's not enforceable. The Constitution conferred that powers on the CBN. And they are not going to yield it to court pronouncement. So unless there's a legislative amendment.
The central bank is a law unto itself.
Constitutional amendment.
Yes.
The Supreme Court is also protected by the Constitution.
Okay.
You can't waive their powers by fiat, executive fiat. The same way the Supreme Court cannot waive an act of constitutional provision by judicial pronouncement.
Okay.
The fundamental human right of every individual is central in our Constitution. Can the court wish it away by pronouncement that nobody has the right to do anything again in Nigeria? That it's no longer the law.
Okay.
it will not work.
So for the Supreme Court to also say that they should wait till that the old Naira notes should be in circulation with the new Naira note pari passu till 31st of December. Do you think the Supreme Court is trying to
take over the power of the central bank?
Yes.
Yes. They cannot sit in the hollow chambers and start dabbling into function that the law does not give to them.
Okay.
Monetary policy and the currency circulation is not a function of the pronouncement of courts. Court cannot pronounce that into existence.
Okay.
Otherwise, tomorrow you go and meet Supreme Court to print money and handle and give to banks. If Supreme Court want to become Central Bank of Nigeria extension, then they should on their own release the note into the system. They can't do that. And Central Bank have told you that they have since destroyed the old notes.
Yes.
Preparatory to printing the new ones.
So why are we not having the new ones?
Whether
that's a matter for another day.
Whether there is a problem
Yes.
with the Supreme Court, the CBN activities, it's not a justification for Supreme Court to become a central bank or a supervisory agency of the central bank.
Okay.
The Constitution did not give them that powers, and in any case, they assume jurisdiction where they have no. They pass judgment that they cannot enforce against a party that is not before them. Assuming the party is even before them, they will still have no power to do what they are doing. Because Central Bank Act is a creation of the Constitution. Now, let me tell you something. They have just proclaimed the legality or validity of the outlawed notes.
Yes.
Now, I tell you, the Supreme Court does not have what it takes to make that currency get to the public by mere wishful pronouncement. No. The central bank itself must have it in their possession before they can release it to circulation. Yes. And central bank cannot give the CBN a directive to do an act which they have no capacity.
Supreme Court cannot give a directive to the CBN.
Yes, to make available what is not available. I think it ought to have come from the executive, a policy statement, because central bank cannot even print money unless there is budgetary allocation for that purpose. If they give you 1 million naira to print 20 million naira, and that's all you were given, and you are now forced to go and print 2 billion naira, you need extra budgetary provision. Sure. Had the Supreme Court made money available to Supreme Court to print more money? So only the executive can do that.
Yeah.
So what they are just doing is like a wave in the dark.
Okay. But sometimes
doesn't amount to anything.
Now, let's go to the man in the streets. If you give that person the old 1 naira notes and he does not accept, are you going to take him to court? Telling him that, do you hear that Supreme Court in Abuja had directed that you should take this money? So the Supreme Court acted more than its powers. It has no power to execute its decision. Many people are not ready to comply. They are not even convinced. And not only that, the operator of the monetary system is not in tandem. So if you saw a vendor this morning, he was arguing with somebody who was paying with old notes. He said he will not accept. He says central bank and the Supreme Court are directed. The man said
they should go to the Supreme Court and pay to the Supreme Court.
Anyways, whatever has a beginning must have an end. And it's just a beautiful way to conclude our package for today. Nigeria Decides on independent television. I want to say big thanks to our panelists. Barrister Matthew Adagese, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for
Barrister Anasalu, thank you for coming. From Agosa.
Yes, it's been a wonderful time, especially our guest. The issue of the old Naira notes and the new currency introduced by the CBN has been well explained by our legal practitioners here today. And I believe that our viewer out there will also understand that the CBN has made a pronouncement. That does not mean
the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court has made a pronouncement. That does not mean that the CBN will implement immediately.
Magic will happen.
And in other words, I know that our expectations are high, but we must be patient. We must wait until the CBN gives directive to the commercial banks who of course will now dispense to the locals.
They have to make
the
it
local
available.
residents.
They can't dispense what they don't even have.
So we must wait. But don't also forget the fact that we started this program by looking at the March 11th governorship and state House of Assembly elections, and it is on Saturday. You must be a patriotic Nigerian. You must see the wider picture.
And go and vote.
You must shun every form of voter apathy and be a part of the electoral system, be a part of the voters who voted in public servants. So that's my take. Do have a wonderful time.
That's a package for today on the program. I want to say big thanks to you for staying with us all the way till termination point on Nigerian Decides. Tomorrow, call time is 7 a.m. We'll be back here with a fresh edition of the program. There's so much to talk about in the build-up to Saturday's election at the governorship level and then at the State House of Assembly level. Take your time and be part of our conversation. Remember, you can follow us on all our social media platforms at ITV Radio NG on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, and then on YouTube. You can also follow me on my personal Twitter handle at Duke Oko. So have a great week ahead, and bye for now.